Our next speaker, our opening speaker, Dr. Todd Zukrajsek. Did I get that right?
Yes, perfect. Right on.
I've known him many, many years, and I'm still challenged by his name at times. I know he's just a funny guy and a heck of an expert in this area. So let me just introduce him to you in case you don't know him. Todd is an associate professor and associate director of the Faculty Development Fellowship in the UNC School of Medicine. He has founded or reconfigured and then directed Centers for Teaching and Learning at UNC Chapel Hill, Central Michigan, and Southern Oregon, where he also taught as a tenured associate professor of psychology. In the course of his career, Todd has served on many educational boards, including the Journal of Excellence in College Teaching, International Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, Technology Enriched Instruction, Microsoft, Communicating Science in the K-12, Harvard, and Education Research Initiative. Currently, he directs 5 national Lilly conferences on evidence-based teaching and learning. Todd recently co-authored books including Dynamic Lecturing, Research-Based Strategies to Enhance Lecture Effectiveness, Teaching for Learning 101, Intentionally Designed Education Activities to Put Students on the Path to Success, and The New Science of Learning, How to Learn in Harmony with Your Brain. I should buy that one. Some of which are available for you to peruse at the Stylist exhibit tables. Todd indicated to me that he would be available for book signing at the Stylist table to the right of the staircase by the bio wall, in case any of you wanted him to sign your book. That is the book you purchased. He has been a visiting professor and delivered keynote addresses at approximately 300 campuses, to which Brian had referred earlier, and teaching conferences in 46 states, 11 countries, and 4 continents. I am very proud and honored by my professional and personal association with Todd, and he has been a major supporter and enthusiast for this conference since its inception in 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, Todd Zukrajsek.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Thank you both. Oh, really appreciate that. I don't stand behind the lectern. They'll get that fixed. So if you two don't mind, you can sit down front if you'd like. But if you stand here, it's going to be weird. So first thing I'll do is kick you both off the stage. Oops. You got that, Steve? The only reason I mention that is as I wander back and forth, I get nervous when someone's right behind me. So let's just play around with this. So I have 35 minutes. 35 minutes to see if I can do something that would cause you to think a little bit differently about assessment. The title, Why Assessment Coordinators Look Grumpy So Often. Actually, I'm going to show where that came from in just a minute, but when I did work at a campus and I was the outcome assessment coordinator, I noticed that people kept running away from me, and they always seemed to be in a bad mood when I would start talking to them. And then when I was asked to do workshops on assessment for my own campus and other places, people would say, could you do it, but don't use the A word, faculty won't come. And so I figured, okay, fine. So I figured out different ways of burying this in here. So that's what we're going to play around with, this overall concept of changing this a little bit. Now, the overall theme for this conference is leading a collaborative revolution for change. I'm going to try to stick with that here. And here's just a couple of quick examples of this. How many of you have heard that active learning is more effective than lecturing? How many? Just raise your hand if you've heard this. We'll look around the room. Okay, this is good. How many have not heard this? Look around. Okay, cool. Do you know how few things there are in education where everybody has heard something? That's really, really rare. A collaborative revolution for change. I would like this gone. I want people to quit saying it, and I don't think it's appropriate. So how would you handle something like that? Well, the problem is that people started out with this, everybody's hating on the lecture line right now. But you know what's the funniest thing is when you look at the data doesn't actually say that lecture is ineffective. What the data says is that when you put active engaged strategies with lectures, it's much more effective. And if you look at any study that's out there, the studies do not compare lecture to non-lecture. What they compare is lecture to all the time with lecture and something else. Scott Freeman wrote an article. How many of you have seen Scott Freeman's article on the lecture? We'll look around here. Okay, it's been downloaded about 300,000 times, a meta-analysis. He put in his meta-analysis pure lecture on one side, and on the other side was any amount of engagement. If you are 95% lecture with 5% engagement, it's the non-lecture condition. So what we found over and over again is that if you lecture all the time, you hang about a standard deviation to a standard deviation and a half below, lecture with something else. Revolution for change? I think we have to look at this, because if we don't, crazy things happen. Now, lecture has been around for 1,000 years, and I like to point out that for 1,000 years, we've had the people who are eager sit up front. We've had the side talkers for 1,000 years. Always have a dude sleeping someplace. And 1,000 years ago, you had somebody texting. So it hasn't really changed that much. So it looks very, very similar. You got a person, and by the way, I didn't even outline them, but you know right where the TAs are, right? You can see them right there too. So the point is, we've had this for 1,000 years. But should we stop something because it's been around for 1,000 years? Let's not forget these people, and these people right here really learned well. So the point is, we don't throw something away. We have to rise against it a little bit. Why? Because when people put studies out like this, and I know Scott Freeman, it's a phenomenal meta-analysis, but it's misinterpreted. And when it gets misinterpreted, you get statements like this. This is a really important article. The impression I get is almost unethical to be lecturing if you have this data. Eric Mazur has done phenomenally good stuff for active learning. He is really, really good. I admire what he's done. I love what he's done. This is Eric and the way he's incorporated active learning in his physics classes. And here's him lecturing on how ineffective it is and unethical to be lecturing. So, and what else happens? Crazy things like this. Vermont Medical School says they're not going to, by 2019, they're going to take away all the lectures. So my response, I write a book. There are research-based ways of actually including active, engaged things into the lectures. I'm not putting up there to buy books. I hate to even do that because it feels like I'm trying to sell books. I put this together because we shouldn't just hate on a lecture. We should look what's the fundamental concepts that makes an educational experience valuable. And then we can look at strategies. If I show you a whole bunch of tools and say which tool is most effective, the very first thing every one of you would say is, well, it depends, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Does for educational systems too. So which one's effective and which one's not effective? We'll get to that in a minute, but we'd have to collect some data on that, wouldn't we? How about this one? Messages out there all over the place. Millennials, and now millennials are becoming students, so we talk about the next generation coming along. But the concept is students coming along today, they just don't want to learn like we did. Yes, they do. The human brain is wired to learn. Everybody wants to learn. They just don't want to learn the crap you're teaching. That's what I tell faculty all the time. So the concept here overall is people say, well, students don't really want, they're not motivated. Yes, they are motivated. So I actually was one time asked to run a workshop on managing your millennials. I said, sure. Can I do the whole series? They said, what do you mean? Oh, I want to do managing your women, managing your Jewish faculty, managing your, and they said, whoa, 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 so hold on there. I said, well, as long as you're going to stereotype and discriminate against people, why should it just be one group? Let's make it about everybody. And the point is, I didn't like that concept. I don't think we should manage people like that. I think that's totally inappropriate, and I think we should look at what's really going on. By the way, this really shows why you should always do group work. It makes your students beautiful. Look at them, they're so beautiful. And what else does it do? They're beautiful and engaged and happy. I don't even know what she's looking at, but she's happy. So what do we do in the response? I wrote a book. If we really don't think that students are learning so well, let's teach them how to learn. Who teaches our students how to learn? They start out in 3rd grade making up flashcards and doing quizzes and stuff, and the next thing you know, they're in graduate school and they've used the same system all the way along. I've actually worked with students and said, I've listed 10 strategies for studying and said, which of these are the least effective? And had students say, oh, rereading, that's not effective. Highlighting, that's not effective. The student said that. And then I ask them, which do you do? Well, we reread and we highlight. But it's not effective. Why would you do that? Well, I don't know. Maybe the same reason that I still eat the ice cream this afternoon even though I really shouldn't. We have behavioral patterns we engage in and we do those things. It's hard to break those patterns. But you need information to do that. So we need to shift that message too. We'll get back to that one in a second. I've heard this message. Students need to be less fearful of making mistakes. Ever hear that one? Students need to be really ready to make a mistake. They need to understand that we learn from mistakes, right? We learn from mistakes. Those of you who did not grow up, and I mean grow up with like digital natives so that you had cell phones in your hands when you were third and fourth grade, please think about the concept of don't be afraid to make a mistake. The problem is, and this is a huge one, everyone is on their phone all the time, and if something happens, it gets captured. And when it gets captured, it gets shared. Somebody can ask a stupid question in your class, and if you say, oh, there's no such thing as a stupid question, listen harder. And I know what you could be saying is, oh, no, this, as long as you're asking questions, not stupid. And I playfully said, listen harder. There are times when students can ask something that might be considered not really an intelligent question, and when you're saying in your head, that's okay, I want you to ask questions, you can't control the people around them. And when somebody texts and says, you wouldn't believe what Todd just asked in class, I could get picked on by my dorm room mates, my dorm mates. I could ask something in class that's embarrassing, leave the room, walk directly to my dorm, and walk through the door and have my roommate say, I can't believe you said that, right? So when we tell students, you should make mistakes, we have to be careful. They grew up in an era that if something embarrassing, really hyper embarrassing happens to them in fourth grade, it may actually rear its head in college. Could you imagine for a moment, I'm just going to pick this as a quick example. I can't think of another example. Oh, here's one for you. Just off the top of my head, I try to do something that's not really, really embarrassing. But imagine that I'm walking along and I trip at the top of a staircase and I have a whole bunch of index cards or something, bunches of pieces of paper. I fall. I don't get hurt, but I fall. And the papers bounce all down through the stairs and everything else. And it just so happens that someone's there and videotapes it. If they videotape that and then share it with people and say, Mr. Klutz, and it goes viral, I could interview for a job 3 years later and somebody say, oh, you're Mr. Klutz. You're the kid that fell down the staircase. So if you grow up in that arena, we sit back and say, oh, you should make mistakes. It's the way you learn. We have to create such good communities where we can be trusting one another, or you can't just do that. So if we want to change the message, we have to change things fundamentally. I think this is huge. What else is going on? Whew. Oh, so those are the big ones I wanted to start with. There's some really big stuff out there, but if we want to push against these things, we have to figure out what's the core concept. We can't just say, take mistakes. We have to understand the community below it. We can't just say, oh, students today learn like. Let's teach them how to learn. Let's understand how they learn. We can't sit back and say, oh, yeah, you should never lecture. Let's look at what learning looks like. We should look at those fundamental concepts. So today, really drawing right back into assessment. So when I had a job at one of my institutions, there was a lunch that happened about 30 days in. I'm not going to have any more personal stuff than that, just in case the people involved happen to be here. But we each got a book, and it was so cool, out of the provost office. The book I got was The Man Who Mistook His Job for a Life. The Chronic Overachiever Finds His Way Home. And that was because I was the first one to work in the morning and I was the last one at night, and I did this 7 days a week, and everybody around said, he's always here working, so that was the job I got, or the book I got. The assessment director got a book that was called, clicker issues here, there it is. Why is everyone so cranky? And the joke, that's where the title came from, is the joke was that, every time you try to do something, you could try to go talk to somebody about assessment, then they're all kind of cranky about stuff. So this really got me thinking, is this how we're perceived? What's going on here for our perceptions? Shortly after that, I was actually asked to go to the physics department. The department chair asked me to come to physics and talk about outcomes. And here's the thing, I just got to block this out for just a second. I showed up at the department meeting for physics. Nobody was there except the chair. The chair says, just a minute, I'll be back. He walks down the hall. he comes back. Remember this too. Now we're about 10 minutes into the meeting time. Whew. Yeah, Todd, sorry, they're not coming. What do you mean they're not coming? Yeah, they're in their office. They don't want to. Why don't they want to? I don't know. I'll go ask them. Anyone ask? He came back with 2 faculty members. One of the faculty members sat down and said that statement. It's the worst thing to happen in education in the last 20 years. I said, why? As soon as you set outcomes, you're limited on what you can do. I said, yeah, that's kind of the point. He said, well, yeah, but if we find something really cool, we can't go off and explore that. I said, yep, that's kind of the point. He said, well, yeah, that's too limiting. So me being me, I said, oh, you know what? You have a very valid point there. So in physics, do you have titles for your courses? Because that seems limiting. Do you have course numbers like Physics 250? Because that seems limiting. Do you have program names? Because that seems limiting. What you should do is put a catalog together that just says physics, 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 physics. And when a student comes through the door, they could just experience whatever it is you're feeling like that day. He said, oh my gosh, you have convinced me. Outcomes are extremely important. He used his own words. So we have to do that. So we have to start figuring out what's really going on there that we can get those types of things. So how can we move this conversation? And I'm trying to do this very quickly. So I'm going to have you chat with your neighbor for just about 30 seconds. What's a common message? A message on many campuses. Maybe your campus is so enlightened and so moving forward with all this great stuff on assessment that as soon as you mention assessment, like we're going to have a workshop on assessment on Tuesday, and everybody shows up. And they all sit around saying, I love this topic. I'm a hyper nerd. So that's the cool part. But maybe you think of other campuses. What kinds of messages are on campuses? Assessment is, or when I think of assessment, I think of. So I'm just going to do this for like 30 seconds. Turn to a neighbor. What do you got? Assessment is, just chat for a few seconds here. Okay. Now I'm just going to ask for a couple of quick responses. So just raise your hand. I'll repeat it if I can here. On your campus or on other campuses, when you hear assessment is or assessment is like, what kinds of things do people say? So raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. Is a what? A check on student learning outcomes. Excellent. Others? Yes. Assessment is a waste of time. Oh, that's a good one. Let's go over here.
It's something extra.
Yeah, something extra. It's a waste of time. It's something extra. Yes, sir?
A personal attack on my teaching.
Oh, good. A personal attack on my teaching. Well done. Is that what you were going to say?
No, assessments are, you should fear assessment.
Oh,
It will be
assessment.
used against you.
Assessment is to fear. I mean, it could cost you your job, right? All right, way in the back.
Annoying.
Assessment is annoying for any reason in particular, or just it is? I think just it is. Yeah, why not? Yes, ma'am.
Burdensome.
Oh, assessment's burdensome. I like that too. That goes along with the other things. Yes?
Assessment is the first thing a teacher should think about when planning a class.
Excellent. First thing you should think about when teaching a class. I want to work on that campus. Yes?
It's required for accreditation.
Oh, assessment's required for accreditation, so it's required. 2 more here.
Complicated.
Assessment's complited, and?
Well, assessment through APAS is a burdensome put on us, but assessment that I designed for a class to test students is the best thing.
Excellent. I like that. So that's making that differentiation. If I come to your department and help you do an outcome assessment plan, that's burdensome. But when I write exams and figure out whether or not my students are learning, then that's just part of the course. Excellent. Well, you came up with some great things, and they're all over the place, which is good, which those things happen. But the burdensome part and the waste of time part and the fact that I like some assessment but not other assessments, that's all encouraging to me because there's room there to grow. A revolution. We could do stuff with this. You see, my issue is that I have with all of this is that whenever I thought about talking to people about assessment, I would see certain things happening, and I think this has to stop. You're at a perfect place for the next couple of days. I think just like I had mentioned at the beginning with lecturing and millennials and other things, and we're already doing this, I think the verbiage has to stop. But much like the concept of, oh, students just shouldn't be afraid in the classroom, they should make mistakes, we can't just say, oh, you should just do assessment because it's good. I mean, how many times in the world can we say it's good for the students? And the faculty still sit back and say, yeah, but I don't have time. Well, but it's really helpful for accreditation. You know, we do, I mean, when we utter the phrases, we do kind of need to be accredited. Well, yeah, but there's a whole team taking care of that, and I don't have time for this. No, we need your data so that we can be accredited. I'll tell you one of the proudest moments in my life, and this is when I was at Southern Oregon University. Back in the late 90s, we got dinged for assessment because everybody did. And when we got dinged for assessment, when they wrote the report, they said, assessment efforts are nascent at this institution. Provost called me and asked me if I could help. I said, yeah, what does nascent mean? So I'm willing to say things I didn't know. They were going to do a focused visit, right? 3 years later, they're going to come back for a focused visit. We all know how the gig goes. Means the report's got to be written at about the 2-year mark so that it can be given to the person at 6 months before they come and all this other stuff. We had 2.5 years at most. Provost's first thing she asked all the departments to do assessment, waited for a year, and nothing happened. Then she called me, and I said, well, wait a minute. Now we got 1.5 years, and let me see if I got this right. For assessment to work well, we have to start with outcomes, then we have to collect data, and then we have to make changes based on our data. It's a 3-year cycle. We've got 1.5 years. She said, uh-huh. I said, I'll do it. I did it, and if you ever want to know how, we can chat afterwards or something. The basic boiled down to is I made an assumption that people didn't make changes irrationally, so I went to the departments and said, tell me about a change you've made and why you made it. The part that people think it's more burdensome than it really is, there were people like in the business school that just redid their capstone. So I said, why? And they did not want to do assessment at all. And they said, well, because the people in industry around here hiring our graduates said our graduates couldn't do certain things. I said, oh, how do you know that? Well, we went out and talked to like 20 of the people. I said, oh, so you did you did interviews with stakeholders about what your capstone, your students were doing. Uh-huh. And then based on that, you changed your capstone. Uh-huh. But you don't want to do assessment, right? No, we don't have time. So, okay, let's write this up and put this in the book. We moved ahead 1.5 years, almost 2.5 years from where they started. We did that. I think there was 23 departments on campus. Interim focused visitor came. The guy came. When he left, he said, remember it started with nascent? He said, assessment permeated the university. I got from nascent to permeated in 18 months. I did that. I did that because I started telling people we got to quit working individually and start working together, and we got to change the message. So what message did I change it to? I changed it to this first one, number 1. We need to get rid of the add-on. How do we change it to be not an add-on? If I could hit a big button in education, one big button, and say, let's reset it, one of the biggest things I would want to hit is this whole concept that we do our jobs and then we assess. Please help me out on this. If we're going to be a revolution as a collaborative, it is not something we do after, it's something we do during. Because if there's an assessment cycle, a cycle means you keep going. There isn't a beginning and an end, and if there's not a beginning and an end, it means it's just part of the job. Part of this means you have to rethink something, much like the students who shouldn't be nervous. When does a job or a task start, and when does a task end? Okay, here's the thing to think about. If I'm writing a chapter for a book or writing a journal article, I just finished a journal article a couple of weeks ago. I gather resources. I end up making notes on a bunch of stuff. I have files on my computer and everything. I start to write. I go check sources. I read articles. I like to print articles out and read them because I like paper too. So I read those. I put them next to my computer. I work for, let's say, 2 weeks on this thing. And when I hit the submit button and say, bam, gone off to the journal, if anybody in here would say, whew, that must feel good to have the task done, that article written. Some of you in here would say, yes, the task is done then. Others of you would say, no, it's not done yet. What's left to do? Somebody just raise their hand. What's left to do? I've submitted the article. What's left to do on this task? I'm going to have a revision later. I mean, on that day, there's something. Hear this silence? How about filing all the garbage I put on my desk? How about organizing and archiving all the information so that if I need that information later, I will have access to it? How about getting the stuff off my desk so my desk doesn't look dirty or messed up and cluttered? I think personally, when you walk around and you see this, this is a person who has a desk that says the task is done when stuff is all completed and put away. Then I will wait for my revisions and I will do the revisions because I'll know how to find the stuff. It's all filed. This is a person who says, yay, I submitted it. Because they submitted it and all the papers are right here. Well, actually, they were probably down here, and then they start the next article. And they get piled here, and then here, and then here. When you leave this conference, if you go back to your office and put your papers down on a desk someplace and say, I will read those someday, and then later put more on top of it, this is a problem of a definitional concept of where does the task end. When you go to the Secretary of State Department's office, and it's always a joyous occasion, you ever notice you're standing in line, the person in front of you is talking to a nice person behind the counter, they finish, and as they finish and walk away, you go like this, and the person behind the counter goes, and you're sitting over there going, and they're going, you know what they're doing, right? They're finishing the task. You know what would be a worse scenario? They just finished talking to the person, then you step forward and they work with you, and then the next person steps forward, and at the end of the day, they have a whole stack of papers that they have to do that is to finish the task on all those individual people. When people tell me that assessment is an add-on, I don't have time to do it, the fundamental problem is they consider the task over when the thing has happened. It's not over until we know if it's effective. If we don't know if that's effective, how can we be done? So, when it comes to doing student outcome assessment, we don't know until the data is in. If it's it's program assessment, we don't know until the data is in. It's not an add-on, it's the thing that's part of it. And it's not better. It's not saying, oh, well, it's much better than the rest. No, it's all together. And when you talk to faculty and say, we need to look more like this than this, and I know most faculty say, well, but that's how I look. You can't clean that office by just cleaning off the desk because the next task that happens, stuff will get piled. You need to teach this person to file stuff. That's huge. I think it's massive. I think we also have to reevaluate what it means for a person to be, rethink what it means to be evaluated. This concept of it could cost me my job. I went to industry. I'm an industrial psychologist. I've known this for years. People don't like doing assessments. Evaluations, I'm shifting to evaluation. I know the difference between evaluation and assessment. Shifting over. People don't like to be evaluated. They don't like to do evaluations. They don't like anything about it. If you don't like to do it and you don't like it being done, you know what you could do? Change the system. But many times we don't. We just stick with the same system and talk about how much people hate it. 88% of companies have some kind of structured performance reviews. This was done by Adobe, 1,500 workers. In 2016. 73% of millennial managers indicate the review process negatively affects their ability to do the rest of their job. Those are the people doing the evaluations. 68% say the reviews are not effective. 68% also said they're stressful. This is my favorite. As a result of performance reviews, office workers have cried 22%, looked for another job 30%, or quit 20%. You know what's cool about this one? Men, typically they've shown in this particular study, we're more responsive than women, and when I looked, it was actually 22% women cried. I believe it was 27% of the men cried. So I used the lower number. This isn't a sexist statement of women crying after evaluations. Men cried more than women do. Quarter of the people out there crying after an evaluation. You have to step back and say, you know what, this seems like a stupid process. 55% of the workers, 66% of the managers reported they wish their companies would get rid of the structured performance review process. And here's what the deal is. This doesn't mean, and this is so important that I have to turn this off for a second. This doesn't mean people don't want to be evaluated. They don't want to be evaluated the way evaluations are currently done. You see, the point here is 80% of the people want feedback, but they want it in the moment. They want it, and forget the in the moment part, just the concept they want it differently than what it is. If we all have our campuses and we're rolling around with our campuses saying we don't like assessment, we don't like to do an assessment, it's an add-on and it's problematic, it could cost me my job, we just need to change the system. We can't just say, well, it's good for us. It'll keep us accredited. It'll be good for our students. We need to change the system. We also need to make sure that the message is right on student learning. When the outcome person came to our campus, I took a little bit of offense to this. The president had the executive assistant to the president attend the meeting with me. Because I was the outcome assessment coordinator, I got an hour and a half with the interim visitor. It was one person. I got an hour and a half with the person. The executive assistant came with me, and I said, you don't need to stay. And she said, actually, yes, I do. They were afraid of what I was going to say. How rude of that. So when we sat down, this guy sat across from me. He opens up his notebook. He had been talking to several people, and he said, so what do you think about me being here? I said, if that's a stupid question. I said, if you could just ask me about what we're doing, I'd appreciate it. He said, well, you seem kind of tense. I said, yeah, you're kind of wasting my time. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, you're wasting my time. So if you could just hurry up, we're going to get this over with, and I'm going to get back to what's really important, and that's measuring whether or not our students are learning and measuring whether or not programs are going well. You being here was a hammer that I got to use to have people come to the first meetings. Then we quit talking about you because something else became important. The executive secretary says to the person, I'm so sorry, I don't think that's what he means. And the reviewer said, I hope that's exactly what he means. And then he looked at me again. He says, so what's your overall feeling around here? I need to get your sense. And I'm serious about this one. I sat across the table from the guy. I said, it's all Kool-Aid and hot dogs to me. Kool-Aid and hot dogs. And I knew he would do this. He said, what do you mean? I said, here's the deal. I do emergency foster parenting. My wife and I took the kids that got pulled from foster homes because of problems. And there's a lot of problems out there. One young pair of sisters that we got, 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. When they came to our house, I said to the 4-year-old, my wife was at work, first day they were there, I said, what would you like for lunch? And she just went like this. She said, what? I said, what do you want for lunch? She says, what? I don't understand. I said, well, what would you like to eat? She said, a hot dog. I said, oh, what would your sister like? She said, a hot dog. So the 4-year-old was saying, the 2-year-old a hot dog, me a hot dog. I said, well, can she eat hot dogs? She seems a little young. No, she likes hot dogs. You just cut them up. I said, okay. I'm curious, what do you want for dinner? She said, what do you mean? Yeah, I found out that they had been in that house for about a year, and somebody finally found out that they were getting hot dogs and Kool-Aid for every meal, morning, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You know why? These are in today's numbers. Oregon. That's why. I can net $21 a day. I have 2 kids. I net $42 a day. That's rent. Now, it's going to be sad here, but that's what I wanted. Here's what I told my faculty. If somebody feeds the kids hot dogs and Kool-Aids every day, then periodically what's going to happen is the foster system is going to come by and check your house. They're going to open up the refrigerator. They always do. You need just a couple of hours notice, because what are you going to do? You're going to go buy fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, and good meat, and you're going to stick it in the refrigerator so that when the person comes, the social worker comes and opens up the door and then closes the door, they're going to say, good for you. You're going to run down to the Goodwill store and buy some clothes and make sure they're nicely folded, because they're going to look in the bedrooms and they're going to say, good for you. And then they're going to leave and they're not going to come back for a while. Do you seriously want to run a campus when we're all about hot dogs and Kool-Aid, and the assessment person across the table is what we're preparing for today? Or do we really want to make sure that there's fresh vegetables and good meats and good stuff happening every single day? And at that point, the guy said, I think the meeting is over here. And we had been talking for about 20 minutes. He said, I've read your report. I've got all the data I need. I know your mindset. We're done here. And that's when he wrote, the assessment permeated the university. If what we do is focus on accreditation visits, I feel like that's what we're doing. We should care on a daily basis, not when they come. So, given our timing here, we made it. I'm going to ask you to do this right now, and I don't have a whole lot of time. Actually, I thought it was an hour. It was my fault. I missed that, and it turned out to be closer to 35 minutes to 40 minutes. So let's just try this on our own quickly. 3 to 5 things the average faculty member administrator does not know or understand about the value of amazement, Value or amazement of assessment. You know what? I got 2 minutes. We can do this. Turn to your neighbors. Just do one. One thing that the average faculty member or administrator may not know that you know because you know assessment. Go ahead, just 10 seconds, 15 seconds. One thing they may not know. What don't they know? I just need 2 quick responses. What should we share that we, yes?
They've already been doing the assessment, they just don't know it.
Excellent. They're already doing the thing they say they don't want to do. Excellent. Love that one. One more? Yes, ma'am.
If you do it, it actually makes your job easier.
It does, doesn't it? If you do it, it makes your job easier. That's the big thing. Those things you just talked about, getting those messages out, and not the ones of because it's for accreditation and because, we have to do it, but because it does those things. So what are key things we're facing? I've already mentioned several of them. We have to recognize the value of the data. We can't live our lives on implicit assumptions and trial and error. We don't need to. We're smarter than that. If teaching is a profession that makes all professions possible, we should at least be moving at the average or the median of all professions. We have to stop thinking about, and I talked about this one earlier, we got to stop thinking about assessment as something we do after we teach or after something happens. It's part of it. It's just part of the system. If you say to the faculty, why don't we do all assessment and just skip the content? Tell them to go learn the content and then we'll just assess them. They will say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Sure it does. Isn't that what we really care about anyway? Isn't that what grades are? I just asked a medical school this because it's a big issue in medical schools. If a student skipped every single class and every single clinical, except when they absolutely had to be there, but they skipped every time they could, learned it on their own, and scored the best board scores out there and became a physician, would you send your kids to that doctor? And if anyone, I'm going to cut you off right there. If any one of you say no, we got an assessment problem. Because if they can go off and do really well on their boards, and we could put their clinicals in there too, if they score well on their clinicals and their boards, and that's good assessment, why do you care where they learned it? Then we're suddenly saying, oh, they need to be in the classroom. Why? What if they sit in the classroom and think about bacon the whole time? I don't want that, doctor. So now you're saying, oh, they need to be in the classroom because that, oh, no. So we have a failure to understand assessment if that happens. And the group that I talked to in the med school said I would never hire those doctors. I said, why? Would you hire the one that sits in all the classrooms and doesn't learn anything? How would you know they learned anything? You got to have good assessment, but they passed all the assessment. Let's change the assessment if that bothers you. We have to somehow get rid of this personal threat or fear of evaluation and really see the value of assessment, really see what you just mentioned. If we can do that and we get some adequate resources, and the adequate resources, when people say, oh, I don't have enough resources, once we do this, the resources will follow. Whew. If we're going to change, and I already mentioned teaching is the profession that makes all professions possible. I really believe that how do we know that teaching is effective? How do we know a program is effective? How do we know how we're going to advance anything? It's got to be the data. If we're going to make this cycle, let's turn assessment so it's right at the top and start with what do we know to build the programs, to then see if they work, to change things, to change what we know. We don't make it the thing we tag on to at the end. We make it the thing that starts the whole process. We got 2.5, 3 days that you can learn all kinds of stuff from your colleagues. I hope you do start a revolution. You already have, and move it forward. I think we just made it. Oh my gosh, it's only 3 minutes over. I always go 5 minutes over. It means I'm 2 minutes early. Oh yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.